Perspectives live stream. The United Nations Development Program estimates that over the last 30 years, 1 out of every $3 spent on development has been lost to extreme climate events. Now, that's a total loss of $3.8 trillion. However, there are measures that many corporations are now taking to overcome these issues and improve sustainability in a variety of ways. And that's what we're going to talk about here today on World Environment Day. Joining us, we have Luke Manning, Head of Sustainability at Refinitiv, and Professor Sally Eaves, Chief Technology Officer, Forbes Technology, and founder of Aspirational Futures. Sally and Luke, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Keesa.
Nice to be here.
So, Luke, if we take a look at the sustainability agenda trajectory, there was loads of positive momentum immediately after January's World Economic Forum. And we saw large numbers of major corporates committing to lower carbon footprints, reducing use of plastics, and even reducing fossil fuels. And then the pandemic hit, right? And then everything seemed to shift in a huge manner. Conversations quickly pivoted. Now, what's happening now in the second quarter of 2020 to get sustainability back on the minds of corporate leaders as a firm agenda item?
Yeah, well, first of all, morning, very early on for you, so nice to see you. That is actually the question that's coming up more and more now. It's that sort of, we had loads of momentum behind the environmental piece. We had loads of momentum, Davos, like you said, lots of corporates. Has that stalled? Has coronavirus in some way derailed the conversations about it? I think the way I see it will be this. If anything, what the pandemic has shown is that probably more than ever, more clarity than ever, that the link between what's going on the ground, the sort of social impact, the humanitarian impact, the health impact, the link between that and economic impact is clearer than ever. Absolutely. And I think what that's given everyone, whether that's businesses or governments or even individuals, like a heightened sense of vulnerability. We're all kind of feeling more vulnerable. Before that, I think that if anything, there was a bit of complacency. It was almost like we all felt that our modern way of life was shock-proof to a certain extent. Yeah, we'd have some bumps in the road, but broadly speaking, we'd carry on going. And I think it's proved that to be a fallacy. I think the foundations, if anything, are a lot more shallow than we think for our modern way of life. So given this heightened sense of vulnerability, like I said, I think it's inevitable that the environmental climate question is going to come back on the agenda. Because I think if you think of some of those scenarios that are being predicted, 2.5 degrees warmer, 3 degrees warmer, 4 degrees warmer, if these hit and these play out, it's going to be far bigger than the pandemic, far, far bigger. And I think people are starting to realize that's back on the horizon. So I wouldn't worry too much, Keesa. It'll come back. It might not be this week, might not be this month, but by the end of the year, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, it's going to be back up the top of that list, I think.
So if we're looking at the urgency of this, and you're really framing this in an urgent way, what are companies doing now to support it specifically? And how can we hold them accountable to those aspirations and those goals that they have to really support and help us in this manner?
Well, I think what we're seeing now, Sally will probably say the same thing, but those interested in sustainability, environmental thing, we're really seeing this as the decade of action. These next 10 years, I think, are going to be crucial. You've got 2050. That's the Paris Agreement. That's where we're looking for a net zero for 2050, and there's some pretty key staging posts. 2030 is one of those where you sort of start to say, if we're going to hit this, we really need to have done a load of things by 2030. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, they've got a 2030 timeframe. So I think what you're seeing from businesses now is this much more focused action. They're really starting to coalesce around, okay, if this happens, if these needs to happen by 2030, what do we need to do now? How can we start to accelerate our actions? And so, if I look at what we do, we're starting to put some much more deliberate, robust, actionable, I guess, targets, things like science-based targets. That's a really important thing for us because it makes it measurable. You mentioned accountable. That's exactly what these do. If you publish targets and you say, that's what we're going to do, and they're out there for the world to see, you don't really need any accountability other than that. You're going to get pretty hard hit by your stakeholders if you don't do these things. And yeah, I think regulation will come in as well over the next few years to actually make some of this mandatory, and you start getting fines. So I think it's a case of now there are lots of frameworks out there. There are lots of ways to measure what you're doing, lots of ways to compare. And I think it's starting to coalesce around a few ones. I don't want to use too many acronyms, initialisms, but things like CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, we actually start to measure what your impact on the environment, or TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. That looks at it the other way around. If these things happen in the environment, what's it going to do to your business? If you start disclosing these things, it gives you a lot clearer picture of how businesses are getting involved and, actually what they're doing in this space.
Right. And Sally, do you see firms really standing out, and what specific items do you see that firms or steps they're taking, and how are we holding them accountable for those specific steps?
Yeah, just wanted to follow up quickly on what Luke was saying there. I think one of the things that's really interesting as well is who's driving this innovation. And I think the biggest change, and what I'm really optimistic about, is that consumers and employees, different stakeholders and supply chain, they're all collectively driving this innovation. It's coming from a different place. So this holding people to account and holding organizations to account, that's coming from a different driver now. So that's really exciting. I've had the pleasure as well. Some of Luke's extended team have shown me the Icon platform. I think that's great as well. So that's built by Refinitiv, and that's a great way to compare how different organizations are doing. And then they're not just being transparent about saying what they want to do, or actually demonstrating what they're doing. So it's moving that from that conceptualization to action and being able to prove that. So I think in the past, the measurement thing has been tricky. Now, how do you compare different types of organizations and what they're doing? And in the past, we've had very clear KPIs on return on investment, but not so much about return on social investment. And I think we're starting to see a tipping point of change there around environmental and social and governance investment. So I think that's exciting. And obviously, I'm from a very tech background as well. And for me, tech for good at the heart of a lot of the work I do. And I think over the COVID pandemic, we've really seen lots of different organizations prioritizing collaboration over competition, a lot of open innovation. And I think the same, we apply what we've done, the speed and scale and agility to innovate over this time has been unprecedented. If you look at like pharmaceuticals, for example, what we've done with AI and machine learning, mining that data and accelerating the innovation curve, we can do that around climate. I think that's really exciting. So let's harness that and use it for some of these other big global challenges as well. So I'm optimistic about what we can do. It does take this coming together approach.
So Sally, you talk about open innovation, the use of AI in the pharmaceutical industry. Tell us specifically, how can small startups as well as large corporates use technology to help them meet sustainability goals? Now, I'm assuming that the use case will be different for a smaller organization or a larger one, but if you could give us the top 3 specific steps maybe that a small company could follow versus a large company, and really leveraging technology to meet the sustainability goals that they have, what would those steps be?
Yeah, really, really good question. So I think one first one, talking about the bigger companies, I think what they can do, the partnership between larger corporates and particularly burgeoning SMEs, I think there's a lot of opportunities to co-create and innovate. So supporting them through incubation programs can be really, really useful. Greater collaboration between different types of organizations. So over COVID, for example, there's something called the HPC Consortium, about how you can use big data computing capacity and power and use those to solve problems. And they've opened that out to different types of organizations and more partnership with academia and research, for example. So that's been really powerful. And for technology for smaller businesses, I think one standpoint definitely is around energy, looking at who you're buying from in the supply chain, what's being done with, for example, parts in the computer. The computer I've got here, so many minerals, metals in there. Are you buying from a supplier that recycles them, that contributes to the circular economy? And in the same way that all businesses look at things like efficiency and productivity and optimizing that, we need to look at how sustainability is part of the business model too. Quite a lot of options I'm seeing in terms of changing business models where you pay by what you consume. That can be really beneficial for businesses, particularly when we've got sensitive price points and things at the moment. So look at new opportunities, partner with organizations that will be flexible around how you consume, so you pay for what you use. That can be very beneficial for you. And other kind of pragmatic things as well, like furniture for your offices. There's a lot of upcycling that you can use for things like that. So it's not just about the emergent tech of the AI, it's also about repurposing and being quite pragmatic. I think creativity and pragmatism, particularly for SMEs, is even more important because you have to get around some of the price point issues and things like that. But definitely look at technology, how you can monitor your energy consumption, what you do, use that tech to give you insights to power you to keep working towards these sustainability aims. I think customers want this. I think it's a shared value proposition. Doing well through your business and being more profitable could benefit society and business at the same time. I think consumers are really looking now for organisations that are stepping up to the plate and not just talking about it and doing it, and will make decisions based on what they're seeing them do.
So you raise some really good points there. You raise excellent points. And one of the things that I heard you say is there is a cost point, a price point there. I'm sure a lot of people listening would say, wow, that sounds great. A lot of things we can do when it comes to recycling, etc. But some of those things have a cost. What would we say that cost would be? What sort of resources would these small and large businesses need to really pony up on? And what would the cost be to take on a program like this? Luke and Sally.
Well, I think that there are costs involved. Of course, there are, and I think you need, to get that, you need that commitment from the very top. I think you need that commitment it needs to be embedded within the culture of your business, your ambitions as a business, and the importance you put on this. But I think as well, just remember that there is an efficiency play here. Things in the future get more expensive and more scarce. I think apart from, and of course we all agree we want to do the thing that's best for the planet, from a business perspective though, if you're just more efficient with using your resources and you use less energy, less water and all the rest of it, it's going to impact your bottom line well, and especially, as I say, in the future where we're sort of predicting that these things become more expensive. So some of it is an investment, but I think it is investment that could really play out in the long term as well. But I think really you've got to look at sustainability in multiple different ways. Like I say, let's take it off the table that we all want to do something better for the planet. Of course we do, but there's going to be more and more brand implications from sustainability. If you get this right, if you have a purpose that resonates, that's going to bring in more talent into the business. You're going to have more, Sally touched on this, you're going to have more sustainable supply chains that support you, because you start to get that feeling. If you're dealing with businesses that are unsustainable in the future, then that starts to break your supply chain there. And of course, there's that efficiency play as well. So I think that all wraps into the point. And this is where, again, Sally mentioned, some of the data that we have as a business and that we give as a sort of entity, but also through ICON that we actually, we give to the market. And this is where it's starting to play out in how businesses are valued and how they perform and that type of thing. It really is an increasingly important view of a business, what they do in this space.
Okay, great. So you mentioned efficiency, also reputational risks that companies can avoid when they do the right thing early on. Sally, do you have a view in terms of the costs that can be incurred? And also, what are the first steps that the firm would take in order to get this program started?
In terms of the cost question, obviously that's going to be quite specific to individual context. So, but what I can do, if anybody's particularly interested, I've got a couple of case study examples across different sectors. So if anybody wants that, more than happy to follow up on that one or directly around different types of organisation. But in terms of first steps, and again, Luke touched on this a little bit, it's not just about the technology. This has to be embedded by design. So it's all about the culture of the organisation. You've got to have everybody buying in from that right through the organisation. Everybody has a role to play. It's not just a top-down driven, it's everybody. I think there's a lot of research at the moment that shows how much employees, consumers, different stakeholders do want to contribute towards this. So let's seize that opportunity. We need to have a clear plan. As you would do in any other part of your business, sustainability has to have a specific developmental plan, and it has to be embedded in all you do. So as an example, just look at tech for a minute, the developmental cycles. You can do things to be more agile to change. So the agile methodology in DevOps, for example, there are things you can do at every part of the line. But yes, it's a holistic approach is key. So packaging, how you deliver to consumers, there's all different elements of that. So you have to start from that, evaluate your particular business, and look at what you can do across all different areas, just as you would at any other different part of your overall business plan. So that's really key. Keep listening to everybody in your organisation, listen to what your customers want, as you do in other areas as well, and be really responsive to that. I think it has to be a dialogue, has to be truly interactive with everyone that cares about what you do. And again, with sustainability, depending on your type of business, certain missions will be more aligned to what you're doing. So make sure it's something that really dovetails with the purpose of what your organisation is about. Purpose for me is absolutely key. So align your sustainability mission with the overall purpose of your around your organization, and then everybody can be driving together to make this happen. And like I say, I got quite a few different case studies around that. More than happy to share both on the tech side, but also, organizational culture and values too.
We will be opening up to audience questions shortly. So live stream audience, please get those questions ready for us. Meantime, we talk a lot about the culture and what the foundation of the culture should look like. Let's talk a bit about stakeholder activism. And we know that stakeholders could be employees as well as shareholders, as well as partners and vendors. What role does stakeholder activism play around sustainability, and how are stakeholders now in that entire ecosystem of a business? How are the individual stakeholders mobilizing around sustainability?
Look, I think stakeholder activism, fundamentally, it just encourages action. Okay, you're looking there where it starts to put different pressures and different demands on the business, whether that's your employees saying, I want to work for a business that does more, does contribute back to society or the environment, or has a very light environmental footprint. And also, of course, from governments, regulation will start to come into play as well. So I think, and not to mention partners, customers, who you're going to start to do business with. I look at when we start to be within someone's supply chain and we start to get those questionnaires through. They used to have maybe 4 or 5 questions that asked us about our environmental performance or our social performance. Now pages and pages and pages and pages. So it actually does affect, starting to materially impact our ability to do business. So I think if you start to combine all those different angles to sustainability, and you start to get those pressures from different parts of of the world and partners, employees, whatever, I think that's a really good, healthy thing. It really encourages you to keep moving forward, commit more, look at different angles. And I think it's only going to increase. So I encourage it. I like it. I think the more we put a spotlight on this, the better.
Great. Sounds good. My earbuds are allergic to my ears this morning, so please forgive me on that. And Sally, if we're individuals who really want to make a change here, I've seen where employee resource groups have really mobilized around the sustainability cause. What other ways do you see employees specifically making a change and really being able to mobilize and support their firms and having that sustainability culture that we spoke about earlier?
Yeah, again, it has to be something that's embedded. All of these things, that they're not an add-on, they're not an afterthought. It's embedded in the culture. So organizations.
How do we embed?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention, kind of drawing on what Luke said, I've just written a piece about conscious consumerism. And that, I think, really kind of puts together how people are responding to this. There's far more awareness of what's being done well and what isn't. People are sharing experiences of organizations that are doing the right thing. You can tell when something is truly authentic, and people are sharing that. So I think we're seeing the rise of conscious consumerism, and that's allowing people to make informed choices. So in terms of one of the drivers, I just wanted to mention that. I think that's a really, really key point. And in terms of culture and employees, they have to feel empowered that they can make a change. You need organizations where you feel that your voice is listened to, that you're valued, and not only that, you have opportunities to make a difference in your role. And I think we've seen again over this COVID experience, the speed of change over a couple of months. You're just thinking like working from home for a minute. Even that in itself is estimated at a minimum to save, I think, 3 million tons of carbon footprint a year. And that was on pre-COVID levels, just on a kind of 5% percentage change. If you think about what we've done there, so we've seen what we can do. We can do things with speed and scale with things like cloud computing. We can make a difference to how our organizations are functioning. And I think that's shown the art of the possible. So again, let's harness that. Let's build a contagion of change around sustainability and use the positive legacy of COVID in terms of more open data sharing, collaboration, transparency, more agile working methods, more learning methods. Let's harness some of this together. And I think organizations that are leading the way in sustainability have really come to the fore over this period of time as well. It's not, I don't want sustainability, it's just my opinion, to be like one of these elements. It's embedded into everything else. And you tend to be, if you're a productive, empowering organization, which your employees are, really proud to be part of, highly ambassadorial, this tends to be part of that process. That they all tend to interlink, in my opinion. Certainly the organizations I've been studying and researching and things as well. So yeah, they really lead the way in that. I think it's everything, there's an interplay.
So doing things with that speed and scale that you mentioned, is that the definition of what we call resilient business? And I know that, Sally, you've coined the term ambidextrous organizations. Is that really the definition of it? And if so, how can a firm that maybe historically has not used speed and scale, or wasn't really seen as a resilient business or an ambidextrous organization, how can a firm transform itself and become more resilient? And what are the benefits of doing so?
Yeah, I mean, ambidextrous organization is effectively that ability to be creative, pragmatic, agile to change, react really quickly, but at the same time be able to scale it. So the same way that a startup, their normal problem is how do you get, you have that initial kind of first year, but how do you get beyond that and scale up and be sustainable and really make a difference? So it's kind of applying the startup principles into a much bigger business. And it's a challenge. I think one thing I would definitely look at, and again, I'm more than happy to share lots of examples of this, entrepreneurship. So ambidextrous organization, entrepreneurship go together. So it's having people and helping to identify them in the organization that want to do things in slightly different ways, that can be quite pragmatic about how they work and can find, I think for every experience in an organization, you find somebody who is an actual leader. They have a passion project. You give them that freedom. Some organizations give a certain percentage amount of time a week, for example, that you can do on projects that are close to you and give you freedom and some of the support of the organization, whether it's tech, skills or talent, to commit to that. I've developed CSR programs in organization that bring together a big corporate with a local community, and you develop these projects that work well to your own mission but give back to the local community, use some of the talent and skills of the organization to do that. There are so many different ways, but it's culture, values, really clear mission, and developing these projects collaboratively. But yeah, talent is key. And I'm sure Luke would agree with this, but when we talk about sustainability, we talk about tech, you've got to talk about people. Its interplay is absolutely vital. Empowering people, giving them the skills, giving them that freedom and confidence to make a difference is absolutely vital. And again, so a lot of the projects I do, they cross over between this tech, education and impact. That's my kind of holy grail, if you see what I mean, of what you need to do.
Let's go to a question from our audience now. Although COVID-19 has impacted humanity in a negative way, the Earth has had a chance to recover in ways. How can corporations work to maintain the Earth's recovery?
Well, I think, look, it's been a really, COVID and the coronavirus pandemic has been a really interesting period of time. Of course, it's been terrible and all the things we've seen from lockdown. But if you took yourself up and you observed it, you'd say in many ways we've had this opportunity to pause life as we know it, and whether some of the engines have turned off, the cars have turned off, the planes have stopped flying, and all this type of thing. Lots of people working from home, and yes, of course, Sally mentioned there's been a drop, of course, I had in carbon emissions, but then you do start to also see some articles at the moment that, roughly speaking, you need about a 7% drop in carbon emissions every year, roughly speaking, in order to get to that 2050 net zero. And we've probably seen somewhere in that 7% fall during the pandemic. And of course, this isn't a sustainable way of living. No one's expecting everything to carry on as is and everything just stops and we remain in lockdown. So the role that corporations have to play now is, how do we take some of that operational carbon footprint reduction? By that I mean working from home, less commuting, less travel, less flying, more virtual meetings, that sort of thing. I think we will definitely see that continue to a certain extent. I think there'll be some that will just bounce back to the way they worked, but others will start to embed that within their way of working. But the really key thing now is, if this has just about done what we need, but we know that we can't just keep everything switched off, how are we going to change in order to make sure we continue this momentum? And so a word you used in the last question, Keesa, resilience. For me, resilience has got sort of two parts to it. There's how you're adapting to whatever comes up, whether it's shocks like this, or it could be COVID, or it could be an environmental shock, or anything that comes your way. How can you adapt sort of short term? But secondly, how do you transition to what's coming next? So the big thing now is, how can we build on this to just drive a sort of green recovery, a sustainable recovery? We've just signed up to the UN Recover Better Charter that says, when we come out of this and you've got your environmental targets, how do we make sure everything's embedded in? How do we create new green jobs? How do we create new green ways of working, sustainable ways of working? That's what we've got to be looking at, just as much as let's just stop traveling. That will get us so far. Complete shift in how we operate against the rest. So it's that mixture of adaptation and transition. That's what's going to make us resilient for the future, I think. And it's going to be fascinating how businesses react.
So change and shifting and adaptation, that seems to be a theme in what we're talking about today. Let's talk about the use of data in terms of reaching those goals. How have we used data differently now as we're looking at 2025 and 2030 versus a few years ago when 2020 was the goal? Do you see a shift or a change in the way that firms are using data? And if so, what does that look like? How can they use data more efficiently?
Yeah, I think the shift is night and day in terms of the data. The data has always been there, but it's sort of been burgeoning. And I think in many ways it's been considered alternative slightly. You know, is a business making money? Yes, no, great, we can invest in this. Now it's saying actually all these different factors we've talked about today, it's having that direct correlation I was talking about with economic return, economic impact. So what we're seeing, I suppose it's a two-way thing. Businesses are now being a lot more transparent with their data, and they're getting a lot deeper with that data, a lot wider with the data that they are disclosing. I think we're starting to see a bit of a coalescing around certain frameworks. So more and more organizations are starting to disclose in the same way, which is great. That means we can compare that data a lot easier. And once you can compare it, that's when the real shift and movement comes from. And so that would be us as a sustainable entity. We're doing that. And they're also setting more robust targets like those science-based targets I mentioned. So a lot more data coming out of businesses. And on the other side of the fence, us as a data provider, looking at, okay, that we've got all of this data coming in. How do we make that richer? How do we start to make that more accessible, more comparable, so you can make those investment decisions? So we can start to encourage fund flows into more sustainable initiatives. So I think to answer your question simply, I think we're just getting a lot more data. I think we're starting to get slightly different. That different data is where we're seeing the material impact from it. And we're starting to get a lot more comparability. We've got a long way to go, but those steps are definitely starting to come together that says that this data is going to be far more useful and embedded, I think, as a day-to-day. It's not alternative anymore. It's core data now.
Sure. And Sally, do you want to quickly chime in on that?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think 3 quick points. One, integration of technology. So AI, machine learning, deep learning. We're seeing the power of computing capacity and power to really mine that at a speed and scale that we've never seen before. So that holds great potential for the future. So that tech integration is making a difference. Also, open data, that open data sharing, we're seeing much more movement towards that with embedded safeguards around security and privacy. But again, I think we're seeing a tipping point of what we can achieve there. In terms of data centers themselves, they've really stepped up over the COVID situation, I think, in showing themselves to be an essential service, and what could be done in terms of remote management of that and smart management of technology as well will have great benefits around sustainability. So as a case study, I think it's really worth looking at that particular area. And again, I can share an article on that one, which is really useful. But I think we're seeing really an advent of what we can do with data. And the final point, 90% of data that's archived is never touched again, which I think is incredible. It's a real, tipping point really of data and what we can achieve with it. If you think that 5G is coming mainstream over the next 18 months, the volume, the veracity of data is only going to get bigger and bigger. So we need to look again and revisit, I think, our relationship with data and what that's worth. And I think we can use that to help address some of the skills gaps too, and use that for really good social outcomes. So yeah, I think data is absolutely pivotal to the entire sustainability question and actualizing, making a difference.
So from shifting to a firm culture that's really embedded in sustainability, to embracing AI and technology, to putting people first and realizing that people can make a difference and push the sustainability agenda forward. So many great notes and so much great information. Luke and Sally, thank you so much for joining. And we want to thank everyone for participating today. And if you enjoyed today's episode and want to learn more about Refinitiv's commitment to sustainability and the 2025 to 2030 goals, which just got released this morning, by the way, visit Refinitiv's Sustainable Leadership page by scanning the QR code shown on your screen now. Happy World Environment Day, everyone. Thank you for joining. Have a fantastic day and be well.